Good morning, good evening, and good day. Welcome to Attack Power Gaming. Thank you so much for watching. Today we are beginning our new Steel Division 2 tutorial series, How to Get Good at Steel Division 2. So we've already gone through how to not suck at the game. So now hopefully if you've watched those videos, link in the corner here so you can definitely go check those out. Now that you've watched those, hopefully now you don't suck at the game, but how do you get good? You're at that point now where once in a while maybe you'll win, but most of the time people are still beating you and you can't figure out why. This series is going to help you tackle those intermediate challenges. We're going to be going into a little bit more depth on strategy, microing, and all kinds of other stuff in this series of videos. So I'm looking forward to helping you guys improve at this game and become a real competent player and to become good at Steel Division 2. Please consider liking the video and subscribing for more Steel Division 2 content as well as Warno. So our first topic today is actually talking about how to identify strengths and weaknesses in your battle groups. So this is kind of an abstract concept, but after playing the game for a long time, you start to see and more easily recognize where certain divisions shine and where certain divisions really lack. I'm going to be focusing on the Axis divisions only because this is what I play majority myself, and therefore I definitely feel more informed and ready to talk about this set of divisions. Of course, I have a general idea of the strength and weakness of the Allies division, but I can definitely go into depth because I've played with these divisions a lot more. So let's start with probably one of the most balanced divisions in the whole game and always has been, the 20th Panzer. This is an extremely strong division. Most of the time, if you ever watch any noob guides and they say, you know, what deck should you use, this is generally at the top of the list and has been since the game has been released. This deck is just so balanced. And I'm not saying balanced in the deployment type. I'm saying it's still balanced in terms of its strengths, weaknesses. It really lacks nothing. There's nothing in this deck that is missing. There's nothing in this, I should say division, not just deck, that's division in general, that this deck is severely lacking. The first way to recognize weaknesses is of course to look at how many available units you have in each category. So that's the easiest first step to do. So we can see here that most of these categories have a very generous amount of slots to use for those unit types. The only tab that's a little bit short is the recon. So immediately we're going to be thinking, okay, so the recon tab might be something where this division lacks a little bit. Otherwise, though, most of the tabs have a good number of slots. Now, not only is it the number of slots, but you also have to look at the cost of the slots. So how fast the slot numbers jack up here. And we can see the speed at which the prices of the slots increases is a big factor as well. Even if you have a lot of slots, if the slots are extremely expensive, then they're not actually all that useful if you can't utilize them. If we look at the tank tab here, we can see that the first 4 slots are only 1 point and the 5th slot here is only 2 points, while on the flip side, if we look to say down at the artillery, we immediately move to 2 on the 3rd slot, and this does make a difference. So we jack up to 3 and then 3, 4. So even though you have more artillery slots, these last 2 are actually not super useful. Not that you'd ever want that much artillery, but say for example the infantry tab, which is a solid infantry category here, it jacks up in a hurry. Getting this 4 points in, that's a lot of points. That takes away a lot from the other sections. So that's the first thing to be checking, is this slot layout and how many points these slots have. And that can give you a strong clue as to the strengths and weaknesses of this division. Although it's definitely not it's not an immediate indicator. Because if I look at this recon tab, yeah, it doesn't have a lot of variety, but the truth is the Panzer III is a fantastic unit, so this is a great armored start unit, and you always have an off-clair, so it's not that you're completely lacking in recon, but it's definitely a weak spot, and it doesn't have a lot of variety to work with, but you can fill out with even just that little bit. And being short in recon is definitely not super duper detrimental. This is not the end of the world. If you have to be short in a tab, this is a tab that you won't suffer too much being short on. Infantry, of course, most divisions have at least a good 5 slots of infantry. 5 is very low, but at least 5, 6, 7, 8 is your average. 9, 10 for some of those infantry squads. And when you hop in here, you have to be looking to make sure that the division offers you a good variety of infantry to choose from, or at least the infantry it offers you are strong infantry. So a big thing to look out for is disheartened troops. These can be extremely useful. They always seem bad. Everyone assumes, oh, they're bad, they're disheartened. But the fact is, having these actually gives you a lot of flexibility in the early phases where you can call in really cheap troops and survive. You also want to make sure that you have some sort of close range unit that is effective. So or solid, cheap 15.5 man close range squads. Most I think all. I want to say all, but I hate saying all because then I'll be wrong and someone in the comments will say, oh, that's wrong. Most to all divisions have some sort of pioneer unit, sapper unit, engineer unit, something with a grenade. Basically, something with a grenade. The SVT version here is a little bit stronger, which actually makes it a better option. I don't even... Do they have the normal? No, they don't have a normal Pioneer. Normal Pioneers don't have SVTs. So these are technically stronger. So this is actually a stronger Pioneer squad than normal. Then you have to see what kind of rifle units it has. So these have Panzer Grenadiers. Panzer Grenadiers are very solid choices. They're very specifically long-range units, though. They're very solid for what they cost. They're definitely not the best. They're not the cream of the crop of infantry units, but they're there. Also, you want to make sure you check those transports. Transports really matter. Some divisions only have slow, crappy transports, and that's really going to affect the way that you can play the game, and that'll especially affect the opening of the game. So those are things to make sure you're taking note of in the infantry tab. You got to know what is the strength of this division. Truthfully, for this division, its strength is long-range infantry combat. Panzer Grenadiers is the majority of your infantry. You have close range, but everyone has some pioneers and stuff. That doesn't make it a strong close-range division. It's actually quite weak. It doesn't have enough to support it. Tanks, you have to be noting how much medium, light, and heavy armor you have. So what is your variety of choices? What kind of tanks are you working with? Specifically medium tanks. Medium tanks are the strength of the game right now. Your medium tanks are going to be your workhorses. If your division is lacking in medium tanks, generally your division is lacking in the armor tab. If you don't have medium tanks being Panzer IVs, Stug 3s, T-34s, Shermans, those are the big four. If we're laying it out specifically, those are the big four. Yes, there are other medium tanks in the game, but those are the ones you're going to see the most often. Those four. If you do not have any of those or very low number of cards of these types of tanks, your tank division, your tank tab is actually kind of lacking. You're going to find it actually very ineffective. Examples being the first Fallschirmjäger only has Tigers. That seems cool, but the truth is that's really inflexible. That's not actually very useful. Having only Tigers to call in at 135 points and having to sit them back is not that great. They're not flexible. They're hard to use. Not great. So that tank tab, even though it has 4 slots and they're all Tigers, is not actually very strong. It's a problematic tank tab. So that's what you want to be taking track of in your tank tab. How much medium tank usage do you have? Some heavy tanks are nice. Light tanks can be very flexible, but you're checking to see what that strength of that medium tank is specifically. Support tab. How much variety does it have? A lot of divisions don't have a big variety in their support tab. You only have maybe some machine guns. You don't get any armor. You only have some junky towed artillery things. You're missing the big long range stuff. Every division has commanders, 3 different kinds of commanders that you'll find in every division, but every division does not have strong long-range HE such as the Grill or the IG-33, things of this nature. These are solid units. They can reach out and do a lot of damage. Some units don't have this stuff. Some units don't have flamethrowers. Most divisions do, but if you don't, this is something to take note of, that if it doesn't have flamethrowers, because these are extremely useful early phase. I always take these. Anti-tank. A tab you definitely need to be keeping track of. You want to have a lot of it whenever you can. It's good stuff. But what is the variety? What kind of weaponry does this have? Just because it has a lot of slots doesn't make it good. You want infantry. You want solid infantry AT. You want to have some sort of bazooka unit because these are extremely effective. Having your medium AT for the Germans, the Pak-40, you want to have Pak-40s. This is your best AT weapon in the Axis division. This is just the best one. For the Soviets, ZIS-3, ZIS-2, all of them have ZIS-3. ZIS-3 is not great. ZIS-2 is a much more consistent actual tank killer, but it has no HE, so you're getting a plus-minus there. For the Allied divisions, most of them are going to have some sort of 6-pounder or 57mm anti-tank gun. You want to make sure they have these things, and how much of those can you bring in. Heavy AT, not as necessary. For example, Pak-43, you don't need a weapon this heavy. You really don't. You need those Pak-40s. That's all you really need. I love having a light AT weapon of some sort. These Pak-184s, whatever the 30mm, whatever the 45mm, excuse me, the 45mm anti-tank gun, nice to have. So that's what you're looking for in that anti-tank tab. Anti-air, this is where a lot of divisions have weakness here. You really want 37 mils. Those are always the best. 40 mil Bofors for the other ones. Light AAs, okay. Flak 88s are nice to have, but you're looking to make sure you have a good variety of AA. Artillery, this is kind of your flavor of the month. What do you like to use? I like to use mortars. I love when there's half-track mortars. They're great. I like some rocket artillery. I like 105mm mortars. That's what I'm looking for personally. Some people love their off-map. They're looking for these things. So you have to actually look, what do you have available? Air tab, you're looking at what kind of fighters do I have? Are they Strong fighters, these are weak. G2s are very low armament, bad resilience fighters. They're not great. They're on the bottom end of the Axis fighter loadout. You'd love to have medium resilience fighters. Those are great. Medium resilience fighters are fabulous. Now, this is not good because it's got really, really low agility. It doesn't turn well. It's got horrible bending. Heavy fighters are generally not great. I shouldn't say that. ME 109, G6, R6 are technically heavy fighters, and they're great. These are not, though. So just keep an eye out for these kind of weird, these worse agility things. They are not very good. What kind of bombers do you have? Do you get AT cluster planes? Do you have AT planes in general? I like to have some of these. How strong is that air tab? And also your air tab is kind of dictated by your anti-air tab, because the more you can keep the enemy plane out of the sky, the better. So the Panzer, not the Panzer, the 20th Panzer is an example of an extremely balanced deck. It has everything you'd want. Let's look, for example, at a deck that doesn't have everything you would want or has significant gaps in its strength. 52nd Sicherungs. Now, if a first glance at this, it's got a bunch of stuff and everything, right? Nothing here is severely lacking in any way. But if we actually zoom in at, say, the tank tab, we're going to notice that it only has Panther A's, and they can only be called in C, which means that you're not getting any armor support until C phase. You can get if you look close, you can find a card of B phase Panthers, but that's still, you're paying 150 points. This is like having only Tigers. This is extremely inflexible. This is a huge commitment. This is bad in terms, and I'm saying this division is bad. Every division can be used in some way. Someone's probably used it to win, and I'm sure if a pro played me with this deck, they'd wipe the floor with me. But the fact is, there are significant weaknesses, severe lackings in this division that by closer inspection are not super difficult to find, but important to note. The infantry tab has tons of variety, lots of cheap infantry. It's a strong infantry tab. That's the pull of this deck, is that infantry tab. You get a good variety of AT weapons as well, a nice big AT tab. Your AA tab, small but strong. Strong but small, but very solid choices here. Always be checking for what is phase locked. This is an important thing to note. A lot of divisions look like they're great, but when you actually look into them, they'll have phase locking. In other words, you can only call the units in certain phases, and that can actually be very limiting. It can be very detrimental to your building, and it can be very hard then to win because of that phase locking. So keep note of that. Other things to be aware of. Armored divisions oftentimes are short on infantry, so you're going to have to build very specifically to have plenty of infantry, as in not vetting your infantry, which means your infantry are going to be weak. Something to take note of. You can see, obviously, a very strong tank tab. Has a great variety, lots of medium tanks, some heavy tanks to work with. Weak AT tab, though, on the flip side. We only have one actual towed AT weapon. The concept here is that your tank should be able to perform your AT role, but note that you're short on them. This AA tab doesn't look great, but the truth is you have some good options in these 37mm weapons. I personally, if it has 37 mils or 40 mil Beauforts, I think it's an okay AA tab. It's not bad. It's when you're lacking in these completely that things can be kind of rough. It can be a little difficult to get things done. So this is an example of a division that has severe weakness. Support tab, not very good. You don't get a lot of variety here. There's not much to work with. It's very small and expensive. It makes the support tab weak. So these are things you need to identify in the divisions, not only for yourself. Of course, when you're sitting here and you have time to look at the division and think to yourself, okay, what's good about this division? What's bad about this division? And it becomes easy to notice. But when you are playing against the opponent, you need to be able to immediately recognize a weakness in a deck. 5th Motorized Cavalry. This is one of my personal favorite decks. The fact is, the armor tab is extremely weak. It's easy to see immediately that it's extremely weak. We only have 2 slots and very little variety, but you do get Stugs. You get your good old Stug 3, which is a solid medium tank. So it's not actually a complete embarrassment of a tank tab. You just have to be aware that there's not going to be a ton of tanks to work with. Strong AT tab. You have lots of choices. If you look in, the Rosita is one of the best AT guns in the game. You get lots of light AT, which I personally like. This good old 45 mil I talked about. Artillery tab, it looks good, but when you actually go into it, there's not much here. A couple mortars and some weak artillery. It's not actually a strong artillery tab. Just because it has a lot of choices doesn't mean it's a strong artillery tab. Go into the plane tab, lots of choices. We get lots of cluster planes. It's good that way. If we look at the fighters very closely, they're not super strong. This BF-109E7's a pretty weak fighter. It's nice that it's cheap, but it's not too fast, and it's got bad resistance. It dies. This is the usual BF-109 G4R6, excuse me, slightly different loadout. But these are the things you're looking for in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Be aware, just because we have a lot of options doesn't mean a division is strong. And recognizing those strengths and weaknesses is extremely important. You need to know what to attack when you're playing each division. So when you come up to them in a quick play and you see the opponent's division, you want to be thinking to yourself, okay, I know this division is lacking in XYZ. I know this division is strong in this category, so I have to prepare and think ahead on how to do that. And then when you're building your decks, you need to consider how to make up for the division's weaknesses. What do you need to do to fill in its weaknesses, its gaps? What can you do to help lessen those things? And what sometimes it's just better to ignore it and find completely different avenues and focus in completely different ways. The 5th Cavalry doesn't have a lot of armor. Fine, I will make up for that by having a stronger AT tab, bringing in plenty of cluster planes because it has those available, and this can really shore up the weakness in its armor. Also, it has some recon trucks to bring in otherwise. So these are the things you're looking for when you're building your decks. These are the things you're looking for when you start a game and you see the opponent's division. You have to be thinking, oh, what are my choices here? And if you're playing in something like League, or you're playing in a custom game where you get to actually choose your division, when your opponent chooses their division, this is your opportunity to think, okay, what is this division's strengths? What is their weaknesses? How can I exploit their weaknesses? If they're a deck with not a lot of tanks, can I bring in armor to counter them? If they have weaker infantry, can I bring in a really strong infantry division to crush their infantry? You know, do they have bad AA? Can I bring in a really strong air division to really take advantage and abuse that weakness of the opponent? So that's what you want to be doing. That's the mindset you need to be in to win your games. You need to be in, how can I push this opponent? Where can I exploit? How can I take advantage of the weakness of their division? And how can I minimize the weakness of my division? I hope this information was helpful. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and dropping a like on the video. Have a fantastic day.